My goodness.
Talk no more, none of that shit. I'm gonna let you say
Boy Hodge, quick release.
Let's go, eight.
Got me started, wrist frames carded, pull up double parking, don't even pay like I'm the owner, my young niggas retarded.
Yo, what up? We're on the clock. It's Caleb back again with Kevin and Julian. How are we doing today, boys?
All good.
Yeah, love to hear it. Julian, what's the
like
what's the word of the day? You like
If you like it, then you should have put a ring on it.
Smooth. That was a good one. I think maybe I should have seen it coming, but it is what it is. Today, that's exactly what we're talking about. Guys who couldn't put a ring around their finger in their NBA careers are kind of like goat with no rings list, I think we'll probably call it. But I think this is an interesting little like off-season discussion to have. Why not? There's some interesting like legacies to discuss here and kind of talking about it when, we're not all like, the experts around like Bernard King's game and stuff like that. But I think we all as hoop heads have a general idea of what people were about. And then, they're sometimes the legacies just speak for himself with the all-star appearances, the rings, obviously not coming into stake in this conversation. So we'll have to see what kind of MVPs or scoring championships, what type of things will carry weight. So let's get it underway. Any I guess really the only honorable mention that there's two of them I think we should talk about. Damian Lillard not making our top 15 with no ring list. Julian.
Make the case.
Yeah, make the case. Why should we look at Damian Lillard and say, I think a lot of these guys would probably get into like the top 30 to 50 player conversation. I think that there's a good like kind of stranglehold on like the top 10 conversation, especially by players that all have rings. So, what's the top 15 in this combo?
I think the case for Dame Lillard. So there's two. One is the Western Conference that he was playing in when he was in his prime. I think he had it a bit tough having to go against that Rockets team that was just ripping teams apart. And obviously, the Golden State Warriors, don't need that much, mentioning. I also think that, we've talked about this before, but Portland never really built very much around him. And it was a lot of Dame just dropping whatever ridiculous amounts of points that he could to try and push them over the top. There was one game in particular I remember. I think it was in maybe 2020. They're playing the Nuggets, and Dame just hits like big three after big three after big three after big three. And I'm pretty sure they ended up like losing that game to double overtime, despite Dame literally carrying them through the end of regulation and overtime and a second overtime. That's just kind of what he was working with. And I think that he could be the best player on a championship team if you actually built around him a little bit more than these other guys. Not all these other guys. I had him at 12, not like he was my, top 10 or anything like that.
Yeah, I hear you. Kev, I got to kind of debate with him a little bit before, so why not give you the first crack at it on the show?
Yeah, kind of what Julian was saying. To me, this could all go out the window if he ends up joining my Miami Heat coming up this season. I'm being honest with you guys. Like Julian was saying, the team it's hard to build in a place like that. And they could have had some other options. I feel like they kind of just swung and missed on some targets that they probably could have. I don't think Portland's as bad a city as people make it out to be, but it's like they really maximized that roster, if we're being honest. Terry Stotts, his time ran his course. They just couldn't do anything. Once they traded CJ, honestly, that's probably when he should have requested a trade out, and we'd probably be looking at this whole situation differently. So I put him on the honorable mention just because he still has some time to figure this thing out, right? He's 33, he's older, but he got a couple years if he decides to leave. If they decide to trade him, then I think it is a great chance that, like I said again, if he does end up with my Heat, it's a great chance he could definitely win the championship.
Yeah, I think that's definitely an interesting way to frame the discussion. I guess time will tell with that, but I don't know. It looks less and less likely by the day, to be honest. But I mean, hopefully, I think if Portland goes off and really struggles, or he just decides not to play at all, then I mean they'll be kind of have no choice but to move him. And I think that's really the only scenario where it gets done. But that's for a discussion for a month or two from now once the season is starting. I think for me, why I didn't have him on my list, I'll probably keep it short. I think still relative to a lot of these guys, he's pretty young still in his career. I mean, obviously most of these players are retired, so he does have some time to still win a ring. I think just the biggest thing that'll come down to it is there's a lot of guys on these lists that have won a lot of, personal accolades that Dame hasn't. Even without the supporting cast. I mean, if we're talking about, maybe a list where reasons why guys didn't get rings, like I think he has some major credibility to, what you were talking about before the show, Julian, is that he hasn't really had a good supporting cast. But I don't know. He still also had some major lackluster playoff performances, like in the middle of, some in the middle of his career so far with Portland, you could say. But he did run up against, the Warriors during most of their title championship run. So, and dynasty, I guess. But I don't know, moving on to the other discussion, another one where Julian was kind of higher on Vince Carter than me and Kev were. I'll start off this one. I think the biggest thing with Vince Carter, I think he has a great legacy on basketball, but I just think as a player, maybe he's probably like a Raptor GOAT, but I don't know. He won some slam dunk competitions and stuff like that, but his prime was so short compared to some of these other players on this list that just put up a ton of points. I'd be curious where he ranks on like the all-time points list. I just don't even think it's as high as most people would think. But I don't know. Great player though, had an incredible prime. The prime of his career was a lot of fun. And guy who kind of bounced around, didn't get really on a consistent contender at any certain point in time. The Nets, I think, was probably the best chance he had to win one as a star player. But I don't know.
I'm the same way. I just don't know if with Vince, he doesn't really raise the ceiling to me like that. He was nice. Again, the iconic status is definitely there. The aura about him is definitely there when it comes to dunking and just having stupid bounce at that time, and honestly just bringing the Raptors to relevancy, back when they first came into the league. But outside of that, as a player, I mean, he had some playoff series too, especially in Toronto, where they probably should have beat Philly in the conference finals. Back then when AI got them there, that team was not that much better than them, if we're being honest. So Vince had some teams where it was just like we said with Dame. He kind of had some lackluster playoff performances. So that's my biggest thing with him.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with all that. I love Vince Carter and what he did. So I just wanted to shout him out. I was debating on whether or not to put him on the list, honestly. But I think he, at least deserves a mention. He had a really good
In terms
career.
of talent, in terms of like raw talent, he's really high on this list. But I don't know. I don't think he had maybe the most productive NBA career, especially teams wise.
It's funny because he had some like big moments later in his career.
Yeah,
like when he was definitely past. Yeah, that was exactly what I was thinking of. Like in Dallas, he had a few like really big playoff moments when he was like past relevant. I also think out of guys on this list, he was probably one of the ones who got closer to a championship than a lot of the other guys. Like he had definitely a solid amount of opportunities in comparison to some of the other guys on this list. So I guess that should probably be a point against him because he didn't take advantage of it.
Yeah.
I guess I'm talking myself out of it, but
all right. I think that those are good places to leave those conversations, in my opinion. But the next guy that we should talk about, which is our number 15 spot on our list, is Jordan Peterman, Iceman. One of the greatest pure scorers of all time. Legendary player with the Spurs. And then obviously started his career in the ABA. So I don't know. I think some of the stats and like rankings might be diminished just because he started the beginning of his career in the ABA. But in terms of just putting ball in hoop, I don't think there's many that did it better than George Gervin. Had some years where he averaged 30 twice and had put up 29.6 one time. And I mean, it's not really like in that era of where everybody was putting up 30, where we'll look at a guy like Elgin Baylor, who was maybe playing a little bit closer to that era of when he was putting up monster numbers. You know, Jervin was playing into the 80s. So, you know, not the plumber era, as everybody calls it. He was playing against, you know, relevant shooting guards and stuff like that, and relevant conversations. But I don't know. That's where I kind of stand on him. Just elite scorer all time. You know, really one of the purists to do it at kind of the fledgling era of guards in the NBA.
I mean,
Yeah,
my biggest. No, you go.
Go ahead.
All right. I wish free agency was much more of a thing back then, because, like, for those who don't know, George Gervin won 3 straight scoring titles, and that Spurs organization didn't really become relevant at all until the late 90s with, you know, obviously David Robinson and Tim Duncan. So part of me wonders, like, if he gets drafted somewhere else, I think he was good enough that he could have a ring. But the Spurs were, again, a trash organization back then. And he's a guy who kind of gets lost in thought a lot, especially with how many great players were playing around that time period. Like, you know, he was a little bit before Magic and Bird, but, you know, near that era and like near that Hakeem, Big O era, you know, like he's in this like weird, like kind of like in between part of the NBA history. And I think he doesn't get enough credit.
Yeah.
I agree with that. He's one of the few guys on this list, or multiple guys on this list, that, again, what Julian said, they just really never. They had solid rosters, but they maximized them, but they just didn't have enough talent around them. Like you said, he's a 4-time scoring champ, he's 12-time All-Star, 7-time All-NBA. So when you talk about greatest scorers, he's definitely in that list. But I mean, again, scoring is the highest ability, and it's the main ability that you need. But you also got to be able to, you know, help your team out in different ways too. And he did that, but again, the talent around him just wasn't great like that.
Yeah. I like Julian's point about the free agency thing. I think that his career maybe looks a little bit different towards the end of his prime, if he's able to move somewhere and pair with another star. Moving up on the list, 14, Pete Maravich, Pistol Pete. Or wait, we have to shuffle some of these around quick. Oh shit. Wait. I think this will fix it. Is it just we might need to restart?
No, we got it, bro. We're good.
No, we're good.
We're good.
I guess the next guy on our list would be Bernard King. Hypothetically, he would we'll just call him and George Gervin tied. Another guy who kind of dominated a similar era of basketball. Just put ball in hoop. Really one of the most like complete scorers, I think, before Michael Jordan. I think that there's a case that maybe he was Michael Jordan before Michael Jordan. Some people would say like early in his career with just the scoring numbers he was able to put up, but just didn't see anywhere near the team success, with New York that other guys had before him. And then obviously, the Knicks haven't really done much since then. So I don't know. It's kind of the point I got, great player, bad organization.
Same thing. I mean, he had the Knicks relevant, but at the end of the day, the Knicks are still the Knicks. So that's as far as I can go with that. But he was a great player, though. Bernard King is like that. But the Knicks is just that was the last time they were in contender status was when they had him. And you could say Pat Ewing too, but I never believed in them teams either. But it's the Knicks.
Yeah, I don't have much to add other than it's the Knicks.
Yeah.
What can you say?
I'm curious how many points he scored in his career. He was only a 4-time All-Star, but he had that one year where he scored 33, and then hurt his knee. So, but was able to come back and kind of be really relevant again towards the end of his career when he, started to become more of a prominent mid-range shooter instead of such a slasher heavy player. So, it did have a career renaissance at the end that, I guess should be notable. But really just his career, those couple years in his prime with the Knicks, was an absolute dog. Elgin Baylor, one of you guys want to start with this one?
To me, out of the dudes we've talked about so far, he probably had the best opportunity, but injuries kind of set him back. Going back and forth, being in the military was crazy in itself to think about as well. So I actually read his autobiography years ago. It was really good. If y'all get a chance, read that too. But the timing with him was just everything just kind of messed up. But again, one of the other guys that was super tough, big time wing, could do pretty much everything he wanted to, but injuries really set him back. And honestly, that was the biggest knock on him that you could have because right after he got hurt is when the Lakers really started to become the Lakers, way back then. So timing just kind of hurt him bad.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people think about George Mikan, but this is really, I think, in my opinion, the first like great Laker superstar in the modern era of basketball. I mean, kind of looking at post like 66, 67, where we're starting to look at a lot more teams in the league. So I don't know. I think he's a Laker legend. Obviously put up some crazy numbers some of those years where the pace was so high. So he's one of those high pace era guys, but still had like you said, a really illustrious career with the different things that he was doing off the court. And unfortunately, like you said, kept him possibly from winning some championships later on with the Lakers. But I mean, he definitely was aging out before they got Kareem and then were able to get Magic. So but him and Kareem would have been interesting if they were both a little bit closer related in age. That would have been an interesting superstar duo at the beginning of the league. I don't know. Got anything else, Julian?
I think the one thing I want to add is I think he's probably like the only all-time Laker who like doesn't have a ring, which is crazy. Like it's nuts, just because of the time that he played. But other than that, I don't have anything else to add on Elgin Baylor.
This one's a little interesting, more modern. One of us didn't have him on their list. I don't know, Julian, you want to start this one for the opposite reason you started the first one? Why are you hating on Westbrook these days? I think I'll let you get to it first.
Look, Russell Westbrook's I do want to start with this. Russell Westbrook's a great player. And I don't want to have any ifs, ands, or buts about that and make it sound like I hate the guy. The way that he plays, and I'm going to sound like Quint on this, and I hate it. He just needs the ball in his hands too much to ever really win a championship for me. And like his shooting isn't good. And he was so good at getting downhill in his prime and was such a good playmaker in his prime. But with a guy like that, it's tough to put a lot of talent around him to be able, like, it's kind of like a double-edged sword where you want to put enough talent around him to win, but you also can't, because another star is not going to want a guy having the ball in their hands as much as Westbrook needs the ball in his hands. And so for me, like, that's kind of, and I know he has great accolades, like he, averaged the triple-double first season for the first time since Big O, and he had the MVP and all this stuff, but like, just like the reason that he doesn't have a ring is the reason that I don't have him on this list, because he's just impossible to build around.
That's valid. I mean, there's no getting around that. I think his style of play definitely takes he's just inefficient, period. I think around, the moral of the story, what you're kind of getting at is that he's not efficient. You can't really put the ball in his hands every possession and expect to win, 60, 70 games or anywhere near that. I mean, I think with a player like Westbrook, we're going to get to a similar conversation later on about a player in, this like really, really modern era of basketball where we now return to the high pace, shooting a lot of threes. And for a while, a guy like Westbrook, where he was more of a slasher and attack the basket, was kind of, I wouldn't say an anomaly, but like definitely a lot of people weren't going out of their way to start playing more like Westbrook. They were trying to play more like Curry. So I think that he definitely had his own lane and has stayed the course on that. And still, like, even late into his career, is a phenomenal athlete. I don't know if we've seen an athlete to quite this caliber stay as healthy and had the type of longevity that he has. And I think that's a big testament to his work ethic and the way he takes care of his body. and how much he loves the game. When you play with that much passion, sometimes you can avoid injury and things like that. You just play harder than everybody else. But I don't know. The triple double thing's a valid point that I could try and make and say that he is one player that's done something that only one other player can say they ever have. But eventually, Jokic is probably going to average triple double, or somebody else in 10 years will, and we'll look back on it and be like, it wasn't as significant. But I think one thing that Westbrook has done is, just brought a relentless energy to the game. And I mean, over his entire career, bro, he's the most competitive player that we've seen. I think he has an argument to be one of the most competitive players ever. And I think even though he's fallen short in the playoffs a handful of times, you can't say that he doesn't consistently keep his team somewhat relevant. You know what I mean? He doesn't have a problem, drawing eyes and drawing attention. And he's put up numbers to back it up. So I think in some scenario, his consistency has to be rewarded. And I think this is it. I think he's definitely on the list. I don't know if he's top 10. We have him pretty close to the top 10, but I don't know. I think that his legacy nowadays is so tarnished, but when you look at it in its entirety, he's really been one of the cornerstones of the NBA for the last 10 years in terms of production.
It's weird because I put him high because he's from LA, and I always got to pay respect to my LA legends, but also too, I'm kind of with Julian. Just off, my biggest thing with him is that the playoff success, right? When we talk about all-time greats, you got to show it in the playoffs. To me, that's where you make a name for yourself. That's why you separate yourself from the rest of the pack. And when I look at specifically them Paul George years, they should have not lost as early as they did in the playoffs with those teams, right? They should not have lost to a rookie Donovan Mitchell. They should not have lost to that Portland team. Even though Dame killed them, that Portland team was not that much better than OKC like that. They could have at least got 2, maybe 3 games in, not just one. Like if they kept it closer, if that's a 6-7 game series, then I understand it. But the fact that they lost in 5 games, come on, bro. And that's not all totally on Westbrook, but most of that is. And I love Russ, like you said. One thing you can never question is his effort on the court, but that playoff success, it's not there like it should be in my
I
opinion.
think
So that's my thing.
it's definitely his biggest flaw. Is just no playoff success. I think he's one guy that really we look at on this list and has not one series that we can look at and say like, I think maybe early on with some of those young Thunder teams, but he didn't have half the responsibility. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it was kind of like even he was kind of the third guy, because if you think about it, like, yeah,
James Harden lose to Harden in the playoffs.
James Harden was coming off the bench, but like he was more notable on that team low key than Russell Westbrook was.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a reason why I've Harden above Westbrook on this list is because Harden was able to beat Westbrook in the playoffs a handful of times and able to at least ascend a little bit further without having Harden and Kevin Durant on the same team. Reggie Miller, he's tied kind of in the same clump here with the next player we'll talk about, who I briefly mentioned before. But I don't know. I think top 5 shooter of all time for sure. Extremely great player in the clutch. He's known for a lot of his, buzzer beating shots. The one that always plays in my head is, against the Knicks where he's fading away to the side, off the catch. And I just some iconic moments, but really, really just didn't have that one year where he was able to get over the hump, played against some great players. And I think that's kind of going to be the falling back, as is for another guy we'll talk about towards the top as well. Just played in an era where there were so many dominant teams and dominant players that he kind of got caught in between, 2 dynasties, really, with the Lakers and the Bulls. So I don't know. It's tough.
His worst enemy is probably Phil Jackson. That's all it comes down to, right? I mean, you can't. When it comes to players like him, he's just like a few dudes in this generation that they got caught in the LeBron Steph era, right? They literally couldn't do anything about it, and it's not even like you said. He's easily top 10 shooting guard, probably closer to 5 than 10 for some people, but another SoCal guy, big time player out of course, Riverside Poly and UCLA. So I mean, Reggie's Reggie, man. The Pacers teams, they were competitive. That's one thing I will give them. They were always there. Like they just could never get over the hump. So I give them a lot of credit for that.
Definitely had some great longevity. I think that's something we can also chalk up to him. Similar, I think we'll look back on Westbrook in a couple years the way we did on Vince Carter, where like, put together a hell of a career. And I think that's why Westbrook will rank so highly on so many stats charts. But I don't know, with Reggie Miller, it feels like a handful of them are just empty numbers because you knew his team, the Pacers were never getting it done, bro.
I mean, to his credit, he was kind of Steph Curry before Steph Curry. Like there was no one in that era who hit clutch shots with regularity like Reggie Miller did from behind the arc. There just wasn't. And I mean, like Kobe was a killer in the mid range, AI was a killer in the mid range, but no one was doing it from behind the 3-point line like Reggie Miller was. Like it wasn't really a thing yet, Like he was kind of the first real like high quality, big time 3-point shooter who would get it done, in the playoffs and on TV where people were watching. And I think that's kind of, the biggest thing to give him credit for. I do think like, yeah, I mean, those Pacers teams weren't ever really getting it done. But then again, I mean, 3 of the 4 years that he went deep in the playoffs, the team that he would have been facing in the finals was the Shaq Kobe Lakers, Like he's never beaten either of those guys,
Yeah,
It's tough.
I mean, he got so screwed by the eras they played in, bro. Like if imagine if his career starts in the early 2000s and goes into to 2015, 2016, something like that. Like it's just a totally different story, I think, for him. I mean, I can see him being a really high value guy that later in his career, another time where player movement's more prominent and he probably gets off the Pacers a bit earlier and it looks a little bit different.
He could have done the Ray Allen thing.
Yeah, he could have done the Ray Allen thing, be a big 3 late in his career, kind of like the Drexler, Barkley, Olajuwon thing before him.
Yeah.
So I don't know. We got Melo, not LaMelo Ball. Like any kids watching this will think Carmelo Anthony.
The OG Melo.
OG Melo. This, I mean, I don't know. I think maybe this one I have high because of nostalgia, just for me. Because growing up, I mean, I watched Prime Melo with the Nuggets. Towards the beginning of my basketball watching days. When they had JR and AI, those are some of my favorite teams growing up early as a basketball fan. But then seeing him in New York and just seeing him really put an entire city on his back in terms of taking the entire spotlight. I don't know. I've always kind of looked at him in his career to the polar opposite of LeBron. And like kind of being that he was the guy who, tried to be the guy in a city and just couldn't get it done. I think late in his career, he definitely had some good chances to win rings on teams that just never panned out. Went to the Lakers at the wrong time. Just a bunch of things. But overall, I mean, I think he has a similar conversation to at least be on this list to a guy like George Gervin, where it's like he was just such a prominent scorer and prominent face in the league during his time that you have to put him on a list like this when you're talking about guys, in this case with no rings. But I mean, even if you just talk about the best players of the 2000s of this past, 23 years in the NBA, he's on that conversation to be top 25, like no doubt about it. So, I don't know. I think that there's some conversations that he belongs in. Maybe not the real GOAT conversation, but deserves the love no less.
Before you go, Julian, I just got to say that this one of them dudes, going back to what we said about Bernard King with the Knicks, that decision honestly probably tainted his reputation more than a lot of people will ever admit. Knicks fans don't want to admit it, but let's be honest, like if this dude ends up going to, say in that free agency, I forget the exact year, but if he goes to exactly plays with young D Rose, young Luau Deng, young Jimmy, Joakim Noah, like that team is competing for a championship. And they have a great chance at knocking off my Heat, no lie, because Derrick Rose himself was giving us problems, and you add in a guy like that, Melo was already giving us problems in New York by himself. So that combination right there is deadly. So really with him, it's just I understand he wanted the bread, I get it, but if he just goes literally, like you said, Chicago's the perfect example of that. Literally, he probably has a ring right now. Like Melo, if Melo's your number one, he could get you a ring. But the just like any great player or any player, period, you have to have the right system. Denver was perfect because you had Chauncey, you had young JR, you had Kenyon Martin, you had players, you had a system, and you had guys that knew their roles and did it at a high level. And with the Knicks, it was just like, who was the second best player while he was there? We can't even pinpoint one person because there was so
It
much
was
roster turnover all the time.
exactly. It was a bunch of different players. They had a different second best player every year. I mean, early on with Amari, they probably could have done a bit better, but I mean, he was hurt every year.
Yeah, that was a disaster.
The
I,
Knicks.
The Knicks.
yeah,
David Lee. I mean, come on, bro.
I mean, dude, I remember when Melo was a free agent and the teams he was deciding between were I'm pretty sure it was just the Knicks and the Bulls. There may have been one more. It may have been the Cavs as well. Um, and like the hype around the fact that New York signed him. But it was kind of just like a how do I say this politely? It was kind of just like a billboard material, like look, we got Melo, bro. Like come see the Knicks, come watch Melo drop 60 at the Garden and break 20 records. Like I I'm like completely with Kev on this one. Like the decision to go to the Knicks screwed his career. I'm not someone who believe. I don't think anyone ever believed he was going to win a championship with the Knicks. But with that
No way.
Nuggets team, like even with like the late AI when he wasn't at his best, like that team was still making noise in the playoffs. He's one of the best scorers of all time, and I'm gonna give him credit for that. But yeah, just a lot in general, like a lot of the decisions post Denver were just bad.
Yeah, that run to the conference finals where they lost to Kobe. Um,
Oh no.
he was cold, bro.
With the
Like,
dreads.
yeah, he was dirty, bro. He
Those
put up,
dreads, Mellow.
he put up 24 or 30 and 27 and a half across 3 series. I mean, took Kobe and them to 6 games, like not a bad like peak prime. And I think that year's the year you could pinpoint for him and say if he gets that championship, I don't know. We'll talk about a guy up here before who has like a small claim to what could have been a great ring. And if Melo gets a ring, I don't know. I think his legacy looks way different.
I agree.
Especially think about it. They win that in Denver that year. He doesn't leave. I don't know. Do we think he still leaves? A year and a half later? Probably not.
I think he chases that feeling again and goes to Chicago if he has a ring in his pocket.
Probably. Damn, it's an interesting hypothetical. Now we get to Pistol Pete. Pete Maravich, I think for me, this is similar again to the George Gervin, Bernard King conversation, where just like a superstar in the era of basketball, where obviously we didn't get to watch, but there wasn't much going on, other than kind of the Celtics and the Lakers, to be frank. So I don't know, where do you guys kind of fall on this one? Had a relatively short NBA career, but when he was in the league, just one of the most prolific ball handlers, passers, just a magician, and puts ball in hoop, like, which is an absolute bucket. In the era of basketball, again, that I was saying before for George Gervin, big man dominated.
Yeah, another guy who played for a trash organization. The Atlanta Hawks are the team that like whiffed on drafting Oscar Robertson. I forget who the number one pick was early in their years that they fucked up, but they like won one title. They're the team that also traded people. Most people don't know this. Why am I blanking on his name? Point guard, Celtics back in the day. Bob Cousy. They traded Bob Cousy. So another guy like super entertaining, flashy, a lot of fun to watch. Just if free agency was a thing back then, probably he goes somewhere and gets a ring.
Yeah. Just
Same thing.
like I said, a limited era.
Yeah, Pistol Pete, one of the most dynamic players of all time. He's one of my favorite players. Like I went back and watched him, and another guy actually read his or his documentary or his biography way back when. Like he had everything. He was a show, but I mean, as Julian said, he was in terrible situations. couldn't really maximize them. He bounced between Utah and Atlanta, and I mean, back then, as you mentioned too, like the Lakers and Celtics just dominated.
Yeah. I guess that's kind of the moral of the story with a lot of these guys. I think it's either the Bulls and Lakers were dominating or the Celtics and Lakers were dominating. So, moving on to a guy that played in an era where it's actually dominated by LeBron and Curry, and a little bit of Kobe. We got Chris Paul. I don't know, Kev. You want to start this one? You have him lower than us,
Yeah,
but I mean he's still on the list regardless.
yeah, I'm a big CP3 fan. I don't know what it is with NBA Twitter nowadays, but they try and make it seem like he's just a scrub. I understand he's old and things like that, and to me, he's had probably
Staying
the
with
worst.
my Suns was a failure. I'll say that.
Yeah, no, that's what I was getting to, right? To me, he's probably had some of the worst luck in NBA history when it comes especially to the playoffs. Like if he's healthy in 2018, it's a great chance that they beat the Warriors, right? But when you look at some of the teams he's had, like when they lost to the Spurs when he was with the Clippers, I want to say it was 2015 in Game
Mhm.
7, and they made them big time plays. That shouldn't have happened.
Didn't
The Clippers
he
team,
get hurt too? In that game?
exactly. Them Clippers teams definitely should have made a Western Conference Finals. There was no reason for them not to. They literally had every single piece. They were probably not as good. I mean, the reason they were good was because of CP3. That's why I give him a lot of credit. He maximized Blake Griffin for the most part. Blake had some good years in Detroit too, but he definitely maximized DeAndre Jordan and older guys and a couple other guys. But to me, he's one of the greatest point guards of all time. It really just comes down to that. When it comes to getting into spots, passing the ball, steals, the defense, like especially getting to that mid-range jumper is automatic, and he can finish over the top with floaters. Anything the defense gives him, he's going to take that and maximize it. And so I mean, again, I don't know why people think he's just a scrub nowadays because Chris Paul in his prime was giving a lot of these dudes problems. And I don't think that gets talked about enough anymore because he just quote unquote old right now. But even now, I mean, look what he did a few years ago in OKC. He definitely maximized that roster. They had a great chance of making some noise there, and they did. And even another thing too, I'll end with this is that he doesn't even give enough. He doesn't even get enough credit for bringing the Suns back to relevancy. And I think that should be stated a lot more too, because before he got there, they were nothing. If we're being honest, D Book was still him, but they weren't winning games like they were when he got there and we played there for the few years he was there.
No doubt, no doubt.
I mean, the man just shows up and takes teams to the playoffs that have no business being in the playoffs. Like,
Yeah,
it's just
bro.
what he does.
I was gonna
Like,
say he comparatively with Melo, like I was just looking at their basketball reference. Melo in 13 years played in 16 playoff series. Chris Paul in 15 years has played in 27 playoff series, bro.
Jesus
27.
Christ.
He's won 9 first round series. 9. Carmelo in 13 first round series only won 2.
And they're probably both with the Nuggets.
Yeah, I think both. Yeah.
Yep.
No, he had one Eastern Conference, one Western Conference, but obviously he went to the finals, conference finals with the Nuggets, and only went to the semis with the Knicks. But
there is one thing I do want to mention about Chris Paul that's very interesting. So, for those of you who don't remember, I think this was 2009 or 2010. The New Orleans Hornets were interested in trading Chris Paul. And it just so happened, conveniently at the time they were thinking of trading Chris Paul, that the commissioner David Stern was in control of the Hornets. And there was a proposed trade that got vetoed by the commissioner that would have sent Chris Paul to the Lakers with Kobe.
yeah,
I think he wins a ring.
Multiple.
They win so many, dude. You're telling me
they win
most competitive players in the league at that time, and two just mental assassins of the game aren't tearing apart the Western Conference at that time, dude.
Well,
All the relevant teams were all in the East, bro. The Lakers.
Here's the other thing with that. Here's the other thing with that makes it interesting is because instead of going to get Chris Paul, they went and got Steve Nash, which we know turned out to be a straight up fucking disaster. And like the Dwight Howard experiment, like if they end up getting Chris Paul there, they run it back with Chris Paul, Paul Gasol. They probably keep Andrew Bynum and he doesn't just go bowling and injure himself. Like that team probably lasts like a good 4 or 5 years, and like changes the entire trajectory of Kobe's legacy, probably LeBron's legacy, like the Spurs legacy. It's crazy.
Yeah. Probably the greatest what if in NBA history. I think besides injury ones and death related ones.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, Lund bias I'm mostly referring to with the other one, but I mean, like, I don't know. I think it's definitely up there. Speaking of injury ones, arguably who could have been, just greatest pure hooper that we've seen, just monster bucket getter and one of the most just crazy athletes ever in his prime. Truly, in my opinion, the greatest what if in NBA history is what if Tracy McGrady never hurts his knees, bro. What if his knees never give?
I'd say, what if Doc Rivers accepted Tim Duncan to bring his family on team planes and he stayed in Orlando, right? Because those teams, I mean, let's be honest, T Mac and Tim Duncan, another what if, like we just mentioned with CP and Kobe, those are definitely rings right there. Even though, how we feel about Doc Rivers is different, but I mean, it was a different game back then, right? So I think Doc, just like he did, he won a ring in '08. So I think he could have got one or two with Tim Duncan and T Mac in those teams, and even a healthy Grant Hill with them too, which would have been crazy too. So like, you look back at that, because if I'm being honest, he was never gonna win with Houston. It just wasn't happening. Like, yeah, was solid, or yeah, was good. Don't get it twisted, but he wasn't like putting teams over the top like that. And the rest of the teams were just
The floor setter.
yeah.
He like having Yao on your teams go, bro. It's like Rudy Gobert, bro. Right now, you know what I
He's
mean?
also
It's
it's like an injured Rudy Gobert.
true.
Exactly, because he can't even move as much as fluid as Gobert can.
Not
So
even close.
I mean, that's the thing with me. Like, forget Houston. If everything just worked out in Orlando, and obviously the logistics have to like is luck. That's what part of the game is when it comes to winning championships. I mean, you look at that again. T Mac, Tim Duncan. Like, come
Yeah.
on now. That's stupid. That's to
I
me. T
mean, in
Mac is
those
more
seasons, he's putting up 30. You know what I mean? The years after that falls.
exactly. And I love Manu. I love Tony Parker. I'm cool on Tony Parker, but I definitely love Manu. And to me, T Mac is way better or talented than both those guys.
Combined.
Obviously, right? So it's not even when you just think about that, that's easily probably Tim Duncan's best teammate. I mean, even with David Robinson included in that. So I mean, that's my biggest thing with T Mac, bro. He just wasn't as great as he was. He couldn't lift those Rockets teams because he just didn't have enough around him.
Nah, that's very true. And then by that point, it was just too late. Um, yeah, I mean, he was definitely close to getting some rings there at the end when he wasn't really even playing, when he was just riding the pine with the Spurs. So he still could have got a ring there at the end. But I don't know. I think his legacy is gonna fall on the back of the two what ifs, I guess. That would be, but for somebody who like had their entire career between 18 and 33, he put up crazy numbers, dude. Like just unreal scoring numbers. And especially, I mean, obviously everybody thinks about the fucking 13 points and whatever 11 seconds. And right, isn't it 13-11 or 11 and 13?
I think it's 13. It was 13 and under a minute. I don't know exactly how long it was off the top of my head, but
He's just an absolute bucket, bro. So definitely one of my like favorite like just pure like basketball players of all time, not taking anything really into account. He's definitely up there in that early era of basketball for me. Like you talked about, those Rockets teams were fun to watch, but really never got done. But I always loved, I mean, watching Yao Ming play was interesting. I just thought he was so cool because he was so tall. That was kind of my perspective at the game at the time. But looking back on T Mac in those days, it was definitely a treat to watch. A player that kind of did that more in a relevant era that I was watching basketball a lot more is James Harden, who kind of has some similar narratives to T-Mac, but I think maybe has a different level because he played with so many great teammates. There's so many opportunities that he could have gotten rings. I don't know. What's kind of the moral story for you around James Harden, Julian?
look, he's low on my list for a reason. I have him at 14. I mean, like, let's be honest here, guys. He's notorious for having some of the worst playoff like disappointments in NBA history. Missed like what was it, 20 something threes in a row in a game 7 against Golden State. I mean, pretty much, the whole Houston thing blew up in his face. It was an absolute disaster. Like, I'm sure I could point to many, many more that aren't even off the top. They're, not off the top of my head if I really, thought about it. But like, he's quite literally like notorious for being a bad playoff performer. And he has been given ample opportunity. I honestly think his best chance to win a ring was probably with that Thunder team. I understand, like, I'm not going to knock him for wanting to go from the sixth man to being a star, because I think it's what made his career. But I think, if Houston has the wherewithal to maybe trade Russell Westbrook there and keep James Harden, they might win a couple of rings together, the two of them. Just an interesting thought. That's all I really have on James Harden. I can't have a notorious playoff dropper in my top 5.
I agree. My biggest thing with him is, as you mentioned, the failure in the playoffs. You didn't even mention this year with your own team.
I didn't want to.
Sorry. Well, I just had to bring that back up because that was a great chance too. But my thing too with that is, I honestly don't think a lot of people talk about this too. Is, if I'm being honest, I think Mike D'Antoni deserves just as much blame as well too, playing that offensive style, right? Because as we all know, like, it did work because you had him, right, for the most part. And still, when you're playing that brand of basketball, heliocentric as they like to say it, no one man is going to get the job done, right? As great as any player in the history of the game, Michael Jordan had to adapt, Kobe had to adapt. Like, it worked because of the way the league was going and the way that he played. It was super beneficial. They even changed like how refs call fouls, and literally it was perfect for him. But again, yeah, they were right there. They could have beat the Warriors in 18, but it wasn't going to happen. Why? Because the Warriors actually played a disciplined brand of basketball, and they played defense at that. It wasn't just strictly predicated on offense. And as much as people want to say that the Warriors lived and died by the 3-point line, they actually get a lot of easy looks at the rim too, based off what Draymond does, Steph's cutting, Clay's gravity, whole bunch of things, Iguodala's IQ, right? So I always say, like, even though, again, I'm with you, Julian, 100%, but to me, D'Antoni deserves some blame too. 'Cause I feel like you put in a different coach, and they probably get over the hump. Now, do they beat LeBron in 2018? I don't think so. 'Cause I think LeBron his IQ is way too crazy. He would have figured it out and broke it down to a T. But he had chances, like you mentioned. To me, he probably had better chances than a lot of the guys on this list, and that's why it's tough for me, because he was right there, but he had too many moments where he just folded in the playoffs, and you can't overlook that at all.
Yeah, I mean, both valid arguments. I think that he definitely has some lackluster moments performing in terms of like closing a series, but I think he still was relatively successful in the playoffs in terms of, getting there. He definitely has like a similar conversation with Westbrook and Chris Paul, where it's like he was consistently a contributing like top, player on a team every year. Like, he was leading teams to playoffs consistently. And I mean, I guess with this one, this is still one that we kind of have to watch on, because I mean, when you have a player like James who can distribute and shoot the ball like he can and heat up in certain moments, just from all 3 levels, he can still be a guy that provides value down the line, especially over, I think, the next 3 years, that he could still, be the 3rd or 2nd best player on a championship team. I don't think it's like out of the realm possibility even for Philadelphia at this point.
The real question is where he
I said even for Philadelphia at this point. You guys are at some point just gonna
look. I have no problem if he stays. I have no idea if he's gonna stay or not.
I don't think he wants to. I think guys should just trade him, bro. But I think that even if he came back and you guys ran it back with the roster you guys have, it's still a better chance than he had with Houston, probably.
100%. I agree with that.
I really like the point that Kev made about the coaching with D'Antoni, that it just wasn't a system of basketball that's getting you over the hump. And I think we've seen it time and time again. I mean, even when the Suns were really good with Steve Nash, a guy that we'll talk about in a moment, but like, even they couldn't get over the hump in a similar way.
It's funny because D'Antoni is responsible for 3 guys on this list. Remember, he also coached Melo.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think it's a totally fair argument. Like, because yes, there are like playoff performances that like, you know, warranted these guys not getting rings. But like, I love that Kev. I love that you brought up D'Antoni because, like I said, he's solely responsible for 3 of the guys on this list and running the same high octane offense that like looks good. It gets you in the playoffs, but it just doesn't get you over the top. And yeah, I don't know. It's interesting that he's shown up coaching 3 different players on our top 15 no ring list.
Yeah, great point. I didn't even think about that, but now that I do, it kind of makes sense. I mean, maybe it just speaks to like what we were just saying about the Harden thing, how that type of system just doesn't lead to playoff success, and this list is just great evidence of that. Patrick Ewing, I think the moral of the story with this one is he ran up against Michael Jordan. And then when he wasn't running up against Michael Jordan, he was running up against Hakeem Olajuwon. And then when he wasn't running up against Hakeem Olajuwon, he was running up against Shaquille O'Neal. So, I don't know. I think that's kind of the bottom line. What else do you guys have? I mean, great player, like just one of the most dominant big men of all time. Obviously, in my opinion, a staple of the top 75 all-time list, and a staple of his era. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I agree. I mean, I want to say it's the Knicks again, but if I'm being honest, like he actually made the Knicks somewhat respectable, right? And you got to give him credit for that because again, his teams weren't as talented as some of them Bulls teams. Like they had talent, but they weren't. In all honesty, they were only in them games because they matched physicality, kind of what they do today. They just match physicality, they hustle, they did all the little things to keep them in those games, but they never had that offensive scoring punch to really put them over the hump. And I give him credit for, being competitive, making deep runs, and honestly, to me, he maximized everything that he possibly could have done. So I give him a lot of credit for that.
I think if Ewing plays in a slightly different era, things look a little bit different because he was a great
He
big.
plays in the early thousands, bro.
Yeah, like he was a great big in an era of like all-time great bigs. You know what I mean? Like Hakeem Olajuwon, Shaquille O'Neal, David Robinson towards the end. Like, I mean, you can't really like you can't beat that. And he was great. Don't get me wrong, just not as good as those guys.
Yeah, put up 20 and 10 for almost a decade straight.
Yeah.
No getting around that. Most of the years early on with 25 plus. Had a year with 29 and 12. Like, bro.
Dog.
No, dog, certainly. Speaking of dogs, John Stockton, absolute demon, bro, at the point guard position. In my opinion, the best pure point guard of all time. I think Magic Johnson maybe has a conversation there, but I think that, Magic being 6'9" maybe isn't your pure prototypical point guard. Was kind of in a positionless era, like for that team. They just got up and down. It didn't really matter who was playing what position. But I think in terms of like pure pick and roll, the way we think about the point guard, especially in the modern era, is just a distributor. I don't know. I don't know if there's anybody that's been ever at like quite the level that of consistency and just elite at doing 2 things: setting the table for his teammates. And he also played exceptional perimeter defense, even though he didn't have the great stature. He was a pest on the perimeter and always in the passing lanes. I mean, obviously the all-time steals leader, but a staple of that dream team. In terms of talking GOAT status, I think that he definitely has a claim for being maybe the most like having the biggest and greatest legacy, like basketball legacy on this list. I think maybe AI has a different conversation for that. But in terms of conventional legacy, I think he went to more finals than anybody else on this list. We won't talk about the other counterpart because we don't platform those type of things. But legendary point guard. And it was a shame that he was never able to get it done. Bottom line is he played against Michael Jordan a lot.
Yeah, Michael Jordan, Hakeem Olajuwon. Reasons why John Stockton doesn't have a ring. I mean, that's pretty much all I need to say. Like,
yeah.
My thing too, though, is that I feel like out of all the teams MJ played, between them, the Rockets, I mean, obviously he retired and the Rockets went on their thing, did their thing. But them, the Rockets, and Gary Payton's Supersonics teams, I feel like they had the best chances at knocking off MJ, and they just couldn't. And that speaks to MJ's greatness. Um, Again, y'all mentioned Hakeem and them in H Town, so it was just tough. You know, Stockton was like that all-time assist leader. I don't think anybody's ever gonna break that or catch that. That's one of them records that will just sit there to the test of time. So you definitely got to give him his credit for that. So again, it's another one of them guys in the '90s that just ran to MJ and couldn't get the job done.
36 playoff series in his career in 19 years.
Unbelievable.
Won the first round 10 times, was 2-3 in the Western Conference Finals, bro. Like, I mean, I think that's the most Western Conference Finals or Conference Finals wins so far that we've looked at. Obviously getting to 2 championships. Chris Paul had one, and James Harden had one appearance. I think that's it so far. But yeah, great player all time. Like Kev said, that assist record and even the steals record is pretty untouchable. I mean, when you think about it, early in his career, he was averaging like almost 4 steals a season, bro. For a couple years there. All right, just pretty consistent. Well, per 36, he was averaging like above 4. I was looking at, but yeah, goated. Moving on to another goated point guard, Steve Nash. This one for me is just kind of like, I'm not a big Steve Nash guy. In terms of like legacy wise, I think he was a little overrated for a couple years because the style of play was so exciting. But I mean, all-time great table setter, similar to Stockton. Really flashy player, and I think his style of play was just really appealing. But nonetheless, one of the best offensive players for sure of the 2010s, 2000s.
Another what if scenario, what if he just stays in Dallas with Dirk, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that team probably gets at least one ring, right? I feel like Dallas didn't really see that through. I don't remember. I feel like I've seen it somewhere, but I don't remember why exactly they traded him. And obviously, I guess it kind of worked out for both sides. You know, he went to a better situation for himself. But if he plays with Dirk, I mean, let's be honest again, that's probably his best teammate throughout his career. Obviously, I know he played with Kobe in the back end, but just in his prime, Dirk is Dirk, right? That's a top 5 shooting or power forward of all time. And so it's tough. Again, I go back to the same thing like we stated earlier with D'Antoni, with James Harden. That offense, again, it'll get you a lot of wins in the regular season. It's got high octane, 7 seconds or less. All that sounds amazing. But when you're living or dying on that and you get to the playoffs, you understand that that's the only way they know how to play. And when you can't adjust and adapt in the playoffs when you're playing against the same team at least 4 times in a row, you're going to hit a wall. Mm-hmm. And to be fair, they did beat teams that they were supposed to. They ran to Kobe, and Kobe got them out of here real good a couple of times, which was, it's Kobe, right? But it was just, I can never just understand the D'Antoni thing because it always just drives me crazy because there's no way you can realistically think that type of basketball is going to get the job done. But I do give Steve Nash a lot of credit because he did maximize those teams, I think, for the most part. But again, that style of play it hinders you.
Yeah, I mean, they went to the Western Conference Finals 3 times with him in Phoenix. So I mean, another one of those guys that just fell short, do the style play thing. Like you were saying, it's a very similar conversation to the Harden situation where he just kept getting there and just couldn't get over that hump. I think for him, it's more of a Kobe era thing. He played. I'm curious how many times he lost to Kobe, but they actually beat him a good handful towards the end.
I want to pose a question before we continue. Who would y'all take all time, Jason Kidd or Steve Nash?
Jason Kidd. I'd probably take the guy that maybe didn't have as quite of a like an offensive peak, but was better on defense. Like I could build a team better around Jason Kidd than Steve Nash in their primes. Like I take Jason Kidd on the Mavericks over Steve Nash on the Mavericks.
I mean,
even old Jason.
In my opinion, it's close enough that if you swap out Jason Kidd for Steve Nash on that team that beats LeBron, Steve Nash probably could win a chip there. Just saying.
Who knows?
Just
Who
saying.
knows? We're getting here to the top two. We have both these unanimously as the top two players to never win a ring. I guess really is what we're getting down to it. I think this is like definitive argument. I don't really think that there's two players that like I don't think there's anybody else that could sneak into this conversation, especially soon. Like there's nobody like really active on this list besides like hypothetically if James Harden or Chris Paul or Russell Westbrook keep getting to Western Conference Finals and losing, then I mean sure that's a way that they can improve their legacy on this list. But two guys that both went up against some like historically great teams in both their finals appearance. We're gonna start with Charles Barkley,
Two former Sixers.
two former Sixers as well. I don't know. Both of them couldn't get it done in their second stints. Or no, AI couldn't get it done his first stint. I guess that doesn't make any sense. My bad. But
Chuck.
Barkley couldn't get it done in his second stint.
Dude.
The Suns after the 76ers. So, what's kind of the narrative for you around Barkley, Julian?
I mean, Barkley tried so hard, bro. He went to that, like, he bandwagoned up and joined the Houston Rockets team that had just won a ring, and he still couldn't get a ring. Like,
it was karma.
It's so funny, man. I mean, like, the thing is like, the Sixers teams and the Phoenix teams that he was on were not, like, world beaters. He was just a dominant force on both of those teams. But there were better, like, in both conferences, honestly, there were more like buzzsaw teams out there than teams that just had like some decent players in Charles Barkley. You know, like the Pistons teams of the 80s, the Celtics teams of the 80s were better than his Sixers were. And the Western Conference, we talked about the Jazz, the Blazers, the Rockets in the 90s. Like, he was, it's kind of like a similar thing with Patrick Ewing, where like, I mean, he was a better player than he was, but like it was like a great player who just wasn't quite as good as the best players in the league, and like would lose to the best players in the league pretty much like every time he came up against them.
Yeah, I think that this one's kind of similar to what we were talking about with the Knicks, with a lot of the Knicks players with just being in a bum organization at the time. The 76ers really early on, like in Barkley's career, were really struggling to keep like a team that would work together on the floor. Like, I mean, they had Dr. J for a minute, then they had Moses Malone, and then it's just like they settled, okay, this Barkley kid, this is going to be our guy, and then didn't do anything with the roster.
Nope.
So I think his best years are definitely spent similarly to maybe we're talking about with Melo with the Nuggets, where it was just like, you know, this is like a superstar caliber player at one. This is a number one guy. And they just didn't really get him. I would have liked to have seen them get like a really dominant guard piece next to him, just play like a really high octane pace. And I mean, this is a guy that probably in terms of players, this was the best player that ever played Michael Jordan in the finals.
Agree. And I echo all of Julian's sentiments, to be honest. I'll just say that I pray for you, my friend, because I don't know what the Sixers be doing sometimes. And I feel like it's cost y'all a lot of success, but that's a whole different conversation for a whole different day.
We could have
That is a whole
2-hour
different
long podcast of all Sixers mistakes over the last 15 years. Not even like, we don't even have to go back that far. You can just go to the last 15 years and all of our mistakes. And I could probably talk for 2 or 3 hours about it, man.
Speaking of what could have been for the 76ers, we got another one, Julian. We're going to beat the dead horse. Allen Iverson, AI. And I think that what cements him for me is undoubtedly the number one player to never win a championship. It's just that I think that he's legitimately one of the few guys that, depending on how you frame the GOAT conversation, if you frame it in a way that's impact on players in the league now, like players that have modeled their game. I mean, we look at Kyrie Irving. I mean, really every guard in the NBA has brought some sense of Allen Iverson the way looking at people dribble the ball now versus they did previous to AI. Like, I mean, just the swagger, the fluidity that guys move the ball now, the freedom really for players to play the game they want to, the way they want to, and how they want to. throwing the braids, the baggy shorts, whatever. I mean, just synonymous with basketball culture at the time. I don't know. I don't think AI would. I don't think there's many players that had the impact on basketball that AI did. I remember watching his documentary. I can't remember which one it is, but it was on Netflix for the longest time. I think I watched it probably like 2 or 3 times, bro. Just there's few players that at his size could impact the game in every single way, bro, on both ends of the floor. So
All-time like 3-time steals leader, by the way, at
Yeah.
5'11".
yeah,
Like he probably is since 2000. I can't think. I mean, like LeBron, you could say LeBron's finals run with that Cavs team.
yeah.
But AI is probably like the only guy, other than LeBron James, to take a team that like has no business winning a playoff series and take them to the NBA finals. And they took that
argument
team
previous to the pod, Kev, before is that AI finals against the Lakers is a huge what if, because I mean, if he wins that ring, that's probably the most valuable ring in NBA history, and he's probably a player who's considered like unanimously in a top 10 player of all time conversation.
Agreed.
Like it would be a synonymous underdog ring, like in all of sports. Like people would look at that and say that's like an underdog, like against the odds victory. It could have been the greatest sports story ever, but they lost 4-1
or 2.
4-2, whatever, bro. Same business.
We took 2 games off Kobe and Shaq. Yeah, man, it's tough. I mean, like AI literally never had anything around him, and
Mutombo was goated, bro. What are you talking about?
I mean, it was like an older Mutombo.
34-year-old Dikembe Mutombo.
He was running around with like Eric Snow, Todd McCullough,
Aaron McKee.
Dikembe. I think they had Manute Bol on that team. Like,
I don't know.
My God.
Nothing. There was nothing there. But I don't know. I feel like the conversation's pretty short and sweet with AI. Just, really was one of those players whose legacy would have been completely elevated if he just had that one championship and has a definitive series where he was honestly probably the closest guy to getting a ring on this list because he was in it. Like he had wins in an NBA Finals series going for him. So, I mean, I think Chris Paul maybe has that argument against the Bucks. Because Booker puts up 40 in the first 2 games of that series and then breaks his nose. So it's like, I don't know. That's tough. But I think that's where we leave it. Any closing notes, gentlemen?
This was fun. Get some rings, fellas.
Get some rings. All right.
Some of these guys still have a shot, man.
Yeah, like we said. But they have shots to elevate themselves on this list too, and I wonder who will do it. I mean, if Harden comes back to Philly, I mean, they're only a couple more semifinals losses away from him moving a hell of a lot higher on this list, dude. All right.
We're off the clock.